The Battle of Con Thien, one of the most grueling and emblematic engagements of the Vietnam War, unfolded in 1967 and exemplified the intense challenges faced by U.S. forces in their efforts to combat the North Vietnamese Army, NVA. Con Thien, or Hill of Angels, was a strategic outpost located near the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, just 2 kilometers south of the border separating North and South Vietnam. The hill, elevated at 158 meters above sea level, provided a commanding view of the surrounding terrain, making it a critical asset in the U.S. military's defensive strategy. It was part of the so-called McNamara Line, a system of fortifications, sensors, and minefields intended to impede the infiltration of NVA troops and supplies into South Vietnam. Con Thien's strategic importance lay not only in its vantage point but also in its role as a linchpin of the U.S. Marine Corps' defensive positions in the area. From this outpost, American forces could monitor enemy movements, direct artillery fire, and disrupt supply lines. However, its proximity to the DMZ made it a natural target for the NVA, who were determined to challenge U.S. control of the region and undermine the effectiveness of the McNamara Line. The battle began in earnest in July 1967, though skirmishes and probing attacks had occurred earlier in the year. Over the following months, the outpost became the site of relentless attacks and bombardments, culminating in one of the most intense confrontations of the war. The NVA strategy at Con Thien was to subject the hill and its defenders to continuous artillery and mortar fire, effectively turning it into a hellish environment for the Marines stationed there. North Vietnamese artillery positions, concealed within the dense jungles and hills north of the DMZ, unleashed daily barrages that inflicted heavy casualties and disrupted operations. The sheer volume of fire was staggering. It was not uncommon for Con Thien to be struck by hundreds of shells in a single day. The unrelenting nature of the bombardments created a psychological toll on the defenders, who lived under the constant threat of death or injury. The sound of incoming shells, the screams of the wounded, and the pervasive smell of smoke and blood defined life at Con Thien during the battle. In response to the NVA's artillery campaign, U.S. forces employed overwhelming firepower to neutralize enemy positions. This included airstrikes by B-52 bombers, which carpet-bombed suspected NVA strongholds, and naval gunfire from offshore ships. Artillery units stationed at nearby bases, such as Cam Lo and Dong Ha, provided additional support, firing thousands of rounds into the jungle north of the DMZ. Despite these efforts, the dense vegetation and extensive network of enemy bunkers and tunnels often shielded the NVA from destruction, allowing them to continue their attacks with impunity. The Marines defending Con Thien were caught in a grim cycle of enduring bombardments, calling for fire support, and bracing for the next assault. Life at Con Thien was characterized by extreme hardship. The outpost was surrounded by barbed wire, minefields, and defensive trenches, which offered some protection but also confined the defenders to a small area under constant observation and attack. The terrain around Con Thien was a mix of open fields and dense jungle, turning to a quagmire during the monsoon season. The rains transformed the trenches into muddy, waterlogged pits, while the humid climate bred disease and sapped the strength of the troops. Food, water, and medical supplies were delivered by helicopter, but the supply lines were often threatened by enemy fire, making resupply missions perilous. Marines lived on a diet of sea rations and endured sleepless nights due to the constant noise and the ever-present fear of enemy infiltration or attack. As the battle escalated, the NVA launched direct ground assaults on Con Thien, testing the resolve of the Marines. These attacks often involved waves of infantry supported by mortar and machine gun fire. In some instances, hand-to-hand combat ensued as the defenders fought to repel the attackers from breaching their lines. The Marines relied on their training, discipline, and firepower to hold their ground, using machine guns, grenades, and small arms to devastating effect. Reinforcements were brought in to bolster the defenses, including units from the U.S. Army and additional Marine contingents. Despite being outnumbered, the defenders displayed remarkable resilience and determination, earning Con Thien a reputation as a symbol of Marine grit and perseverance. One of the most intense and defining phases of the Battle of Con Thien unfolded in September 1967, a period during which the NVA significantly escalated their efforts to seize control of the strategically vital hill. This phase was marked by relentless and ferocious fighting, as both sides poured immense resources and manpower into the conflict. The NVA employed coordinated infantry assaults supported by sustained artillery barrages, aiming to overwhelm the defenders through sheer persistence and force. The U.S. Marines, entrenched and determined to hold their ground, faced an onslaught that tested their resilience to the breaking point. The fighting reached a fever pitch, with brutal engagements leading to substantial casualties on both sides. Marines often found themselves defending against wave after wave of NVA troops, their positions shaken by the near-constant impact of enemy artillery and mortar rounds. The scenes at Con Thien were described as chaotic and harrowing, with the roar of gunfire, the explosion of shells, and the cries of the wounded forming an almost unbroken cacophony. The U.S. response to this dire situation was characterized by the overwhelming application of firepower. Central to this effort was Operation Kingfisher, a large-scale campaign explicitly designed to alleviate the intense pressure on Con Thien and disrupt NVA operations in the surrounding area. The operation exemplified the use of combined arms tactics, involving close coordination between infantry units, tanks, artillery, and air support. Infantry forces, supported by M48 Patton tanks, engaged in grueling firefights as they sought to push back the advancing NVA. At the same time, artillery batteries located at nearby bases like Dong Ha and Cam Lo unleashed a torrent of fire, targeting enemy positions identified by forward observers. The skies above Con Thien were filled with the roar of aircraft, as B-52 bombers conducted devastating carpet bombing runs while fighter bombers executed precision strikes on NVA strongholds. The sheer scale and intensity of these efforts ultimately succeeded in preventing the fall of Con Thien, ensuring that the hill remained in U.S. hands despite the ferocity of the enemy's assault. However, this hard-fought victory came at an enormous cost. American casualties during this phase were significant, with hundreds of Marines killed or wounded in the line of duty. The physical toll was matched by the psychological strain, as the defenders endured unrelenting pressure in an environment defined by violence and destruction. The NVA also suffered severe losses, with reports indicating that their casualties far exceeded those of the U.S. forces. Yet their willingness to endure such heavy losses underscored their determination and their strategic commitment to challenging U.S. dominance in the region. This grim calculus highlighted the broader challenges faced by American forces in achieving a decisive victory in a war characterized by attrition and protracted conflict. The aftermath of the battle left Con Thien transformed into a landscape of utter devastation. The once strategic hill, with its commanding view of the surrounding terrain, was reduced to little more than a scarred and barren wasteland. Its surface was pockmarked with craters from countless artillery shells and bombs, while debris, shattered equipment, and the remnants of war littered the area. For the Marines who fought and survived there, the experience was deeply formative, leaving an indelible mark on their perceptions of the war and its human cost. Many of these veterans bore the physical and emotional scars of their ordeal for the remainder of their lives, a poignant reminder of the personal sacrifices made in the service of their mission. The memory of Con Thien, with its brutal conditions and unyielding demands, became a powerful symbol of the war's intensity and the fortitude required to endure it. In the broader context of the Vietnam War, the Battle of Con Thien illuminated several critical dynamics that defined the conflict as a whole. It underscored the immense difficulty of fighting a determined and well-concealed enemy who utilized the terrain to great advantage. The battle demonstrated the limitations of American firepower, as even the most advanced weapons and tactics could not guarantee victory against an adversary willing to sustain heavy losses. Moreover, the battle brought into sharp focus the immense human cost of the war, as both sides endured staggering casualties and immense suffering. Con Thien, with its combination of strategic importance and symbolic weight, came to embody the larger struggle of the Vietnam War, a grueling contest of attrition, endurance, and competing ideologies. Today, the battle is remembered as a testament to the courage and sacrifice of those who served, a stark and enduring reminder of the hardships faced by soldiers in one of the most challenging theaters of war in modern history.